This is Jose Merino, Editor-in-Chief of the Neurology family of journals. The Neurology podcast provides practical information to neurologists and other clinicians to help them provide better care for their patients. Thanks for listening and have a great week.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Neurology podcast. I'm Roy Strowd, neurologist and neuro-oncologist at Wake Forest University School of Medicine and the current editor of the journal Neurology Education. And I'm here today with Susannah Cornes, professor of neurology, epilepsy specialist, and co-director for the direct patient care for the clinical micro system clerkship at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Cornes is author of a recent article in Neurology Education titled Rewarding Our Educators, Design and Evaluation of a Program to Fund Teaching in Neurology. A great article. It's published in the December 13th, 2024 journal, and it's in the March 2025 issue. Susannah, it's great to have you here to discuss your article.
Thank you so much, Roy. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, your article describes the development and evaluation of the InTeach program, the Neurology Teaching EVU and Community Hub, a time-based teaching incentive program in an academic neurology department that was designed to support and financially reward faculty for essential educational activities that reduce clinical revenue. So really important for all of the field and neurologists. Faculty reported that the program not only reduced barriers to teaching, but also reinforced their educator identity, increased motivation, and signal the genuine commitment to medical education. There is a ton for neurologists in practice and in academic settings to learn from this article. And so I thought we'd start by just setting the stage. So can you talk to us a little bit about what inspired the creation of a teaching incentive program like InTeach, and what specific challenges in academic neurology were you trying to address?
As both a clinician and an educator, I've seen firsthand how passionate our neurology faculty are about teaching, but also it's really hard to balance teaching with the intense demands of clinical and research obligations. And while our faculty love teaching, sometimes the activities that are tied to revenue can win out, and that leaves teaching to happen at the margins of what we do. And so this project and the InTeach program really grew out of that tension and our desire to create a structure that not only supports faculty in their educational roles, but also fosters their motivation to teach and really celebrates that part of what they do. And so we wanted to design a program that would be meaningful for faculty and also feasible to build and sustain. And so I'm really excited to dive into the conversation and think more about some of the lessons we learned along the way that might be helpful to others.
Yeah, I think that tension is so real. Like, I love to teach. I want to teach. I remember being that student, and yet I've got to manage my time and financially navigate the system. So tackling that is such an important thing with this article. So can you walk us through the InTeach program? How does it work, particularly the EVU system, and what kinds of teaching activities were awarded EVUs?
There's really no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to designing these kinds of programs that incentivize teaching. And for us, we were inspired by something familiar. We'd long had a clinical bonus system that was tied to RVUs, or relative value units, as a way to measure and reward our clinical productivity. So we thought we would apply a similar concept to education. And that was really at the heart of the design. So we created an EVU, or Educational Value Unit system, that works a lot like the RVUs, but instead of tracking patient visits or procedures, we're tracking a standardized time-based metric along with a multiplier that reflects how much the teaching impacts the clinical productivity. We really tried to keep it simple, have a clear rubric that awards EVUs for a wide range of activities, everything from giving a lecture in our pre-clerkship neuroscience block to having a student see patients with you in clinic. But one of our key design principles was trying to be fairly straightforward. So if a faculty member gives a 1-hour lecture, they can log it in a mobile platform, and the system automatically will calculate the EVUs, and it's transparent and easy to use. And then they get a stipend at the end of the year based on their participation. And to make it feasible, we really focused on core educational activities that directly benefit med students and residents. These are activities that previously weren't formally recognized or compensated. And we kept the scope pretty specific around activities that reduced clinical productivity. So like I mentioned before, a pre-clerkship lecture or small group facilitation would be included, but something like rounding with the team as part of an inpatient service would not, because that's part of clinical care and is clinically productive. And then over time, we've added a few activities that support our broader educational mission, like faculty development programs that focus on improving our teachers' skills.
It's a great description. And there's a really helpful table that I remember from your article that goes through how you all categorized those. I like that you really focused the EVUs on activities where faculty would have reduced clinical productivity, right, as to balance and offset that. I think that's a really attractive way that you did that. One of the interesting things from your study and from the interviews that you did with faculty was how the program really reinforced educator identity and pride in the department. Why do you think making teaching visible in this way was so powerful, for your faculty?
Really one of the more surprising, unexpected, and powerful themes of the interviews, I think, because for so long, teaching has really been hidden work. It's essential, but it's invisible often to leadership and colleagues. And sometimes we learned even to ourselves. Some faculty really felt by logging, they could kind of look at what they did and say, oh gosh, wow, I've really done a lot to support my learners this year. So by creating a system that explicitly counted and rewarded teaching, we weren't just offering a stipend, we were really shining a light on the work itself. We were signaling then in a concrete way that education is core to who we are as a department, and that faculty contributions in this space are valued and really central to the mission. And that visibility, I think, eased the burden of the work that faculty sometimes perceive as overflow from teaching, like having some extra charting at night after working with a student during the day. Faculty felt that the program acknowledged that extra time and that they could say, hey, the department values what I'm doing in a real way, and here it is. And that visibility helped faculty reconnect, I think, with their own sense of themselves as teachers and feeling pride, like you mentioned, not just in their personal role, but in being a part of a department that shared that value. I think that enabled a sense of belonging and a sense of alignment, that their personal values as educators were reflected back to them by the institution. And one of my favorite outcomes from our survey was that 93% of our faculty said they felt the department highly valued teaching. And I thought that that was powerful, and it showed that the impact of the program really went beyond that monetary value.
Yeah, it makes me think of like my smart watch, right? It's like tracking my steps. And you're like, oh, these are my teaching steps. I can feel pride that I've really walked a long way with my learners. So there's certainly an incentive there, but you get that additional reward because it's valuable. So great way to think about it. You did notice that there were some potential downsides of a monetary incentive. So I'm wondering, how do you balance the risks of undermining that intrinsic motivation that faculty have with the benefits of this type of external support?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about these motivational frameworks, and I think they're really fascinating. The last thing we wanted was to make teaching feel transactional or to undermine the intrinsic joy that so many of our faculty already find through their teaching. And in fact, I really wasn't sure at the outset of building the program whether the financial incentive would make a meaningful difference for our faculty, because they really were already deeply motivated to teach. So that's why one of our key goals in the interviews was to understand how the program affected our faculty motivation. And I just will share, there's, for behavioral economists, this idea of a tension between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation called motivational crowding theory. And it describes that these extrinsic rewards can crowd out our intrinsic motivation. So a classic example is if you're having a blood drive, if you offer a small token like a chocolate bar, you'll have more volunteers to donate blood than if you offer cash. And, we thought the same thing could apply here for our teachers. So we were very intentional about how we approached it and how the incentive delivery, the size, the type, and the framing could be, really important to the success of the program. So we tried to make the delivery personal. The faculty receive a thank you letter with leadership CC'd at the end of the year. That's a tangible sign that the department sees and values their work. And our goal was always to create an ecosystem where the intrinsic motivation really stays at the center, and these extrinsic incentives serve more as a signal of support to reduce some of those real practical barriers learners and not to replace that internal drive. So we're still vigilant about that and about equity and making sure the program doesn't unintentionally create new disparities in how we value teaching.
As we think about that equity piece, in the paper you write that some faculty did raise concerns about teaching that wasn't included in the incentive program, things like mentoring or writing letters. How do you approach that equity and the scope and deciding these things of what to incentivize?
We do so much teaching, and I want to acknowledge that it's not all in this particular program. Any system that assigns relative value risks sending an unintended message that some teaching is more valued than others. And so I think the way to combat that is, to recognize that we have to be dynamic and faculty driven. Our committee welcomes recommendations from our faculty about new activities to consider. And there's an open survey link on our program site where faculty submit their input, feedback, recommendations. And we have continued to add things year over year. And we have an approach that looks at several key factors, and we're very transparent about that. So, does this new teaching activity directly benefit our core learners? And we define those as our med students and residents initially. Is it undersubscribed, meaning we need to create new incentives potentially to get adequate faculty participation? Does it reduce our clinical productivity? And is it something that's open to a broad group of faculty? So those are the factors that have driven our consideration. And based on that, we have added some things year over year. Right now, we're exploring fellowship teaching. That's what's on our docket for next year. And, like I mentioned, this transparency, letting faculty know what we're considering and what our process is, I think has been helpful. At the heart of it, it's about creating that culture, I think, where faculty do feel heard and the program grows with them. And we've also acknowledged there are other ways of recognizing some things that aren't included. So we have a separate program to recognize scholarship, and we've also increased our awards for mentorship.
I've learned so much from our conversation today and from your paper. For my last question, I am wondering what lessons you would like us to take away from this. So if a neurology department or neurology practice wanted to start something similar, what are those lessons or pitfalls from your journey that you would want them to know?
I think starting by listening to faculty before designing a program, spending time understanding the specific context where the gaps are, where the hidden work is, and where those stress points are for your educators. That's a critical starting point. And then engaging faculty and leadership and reflecting on your institutional and your departmental values so that you can make sure your program is aligned with the things that you really want to elevate within your educational mission. And I think by doing that too, you can get leadership buy-in, which is of course critical, but will follow when we're engaging in our faculty and learners' needs and aligning with our mission. So that's the starting point, I would say. And then I can't overstate the importance of keeping it relatively simple and transparent and user-friendly because it will need to adapt over time. And you don't want the burden of engagement to outweigh the benefit for the faculty. So that takes some thought. And we found that piloting the program was really helpful to make sure that our rubrics made sense and that we stress tested things before we scaled it up. And like I mentioned, just expecting there to need to be flexibility because programs change over time, and that the financial intervention in and of itself is not the final story. It's really building a culture around valuing education and to not let perfect be the enemy of good enough. It's almost impossible to have a perfect program, but I think it's more important to do something that communicates value, whatever it is for your institution.
Well, Susannah, congratulations on this publication, and I'm just inspired to go teach and to see where this can go with other groups. So thanks for talking with us through your paper and giving us some insights on how you got there.
Thank you so much, Roy, for the opportunity to share. I hope folks feel inspired. It's really been my joy to get to work with the faculty here on this program. And we are, as a specialty, such amazing teachers. So to all the teachers out there, I hope this is useful.
This is Stacey Clardy, your podcast editor. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please take a few moments to subscribe, rate, and review the Neurology Podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And remember, you can always head to neurology.org/podcast for our full list of past episodes. Or you can also search by keyword in your podcast app for any neurology-specific topics you want to learn about.